Welcome back to the Midwest Minute. I'm your host, Ross Thompson, and today we're going to be discussing birthright citizenship. And is it time to rethink it? Because 17 words, that's all it takes. 17 words in the 14th Amendment have decided the citizenship of every single person born in this country for the past 158 years. And this year, those 17 words went all the way to the Supreme Court twice, and it was settled by one vote. But before we begin, I'd have to do a little shameless plug. I got my Facebook page up and running, trying to do a post every day, as well as I got a website now, midwestminute.net. You can go there, you can find my latest videos, as well as other various blog posts. I've been trying to do some more short form writing, reading, and staying current with some different news things. Those will all be posted to my Facebook, at Midwest Minute, and as well as my X. So if you follow there, you'll see the latest on my content, I guess, and some different news. Otherwise, like, subscribe, check me out on whatever podcast page you like for video form. So let's get into it. Section 1 of the 14th Amendment states, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. That's it. That's the whole ball game right there. Everyone born here and subject to the jurisdiction of the United States is automatically a citizen. No application, no waiting period, no exceptions written in the text beyond one phrase, subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And that phrase, boy, it's doing a lot of work. Here's the thing that nobody tells you when you learn this in high school civics. There's genuine, serious disagreement among actual sitting Supreme Court justices, not just cable news pundits, about what subject to the jurisdiction even means. Does it just mean has to follow U.S. law, which is true basically of anyone standing on American soil, or does it mean something narrower, something like owes their primary allegiance, political loyalty, allegiance to the United States, which is a very, very different bar. That single question is an entire modern fight. So let's get some history under our feet before we get into the current argument. Let's rewind to 1857. The Supreme Court hands down Dred Scott versus Sanford, a case where a black man who'd been enslaved sued for his freedom. And the court didn't just rule against him, it actually ruled that black people, enslaved or free, could never be American citizens, period, no matter where they were born. It stood as a kind of a constitutional roadblock even after the Civil War ended slavery. So after the war, Congress does two things. First, an ordinary law, the Civil Rights Act of 1866, declares that anyone born in the United States and not subject to any foreign power is a citizen. But a law is just a law. A future Congress can repeal it. So they go further. They put the same idea directly into the Constitution as the 14th Amendment. Specifically, so no future court, no future Congress, and this part matters, no future president could unilaterally strip an entire group of American-born people of all their citizenship ever again. That's the why it was built as a permanent guarantee, born directly out of the correcting one of the decisions our Supreme Court made. Now, we can fast forward to 1898, a case called the United States versus Wong Kim Ark. Wong Kim Ark was born in San Francisco to Chinese immigrant parents. And here's the key detail. At that time, federal law literally barred Chinese immigrants from ever becoming naturalized citizens. His parents could live here 50 years and never become citizens. When Ark, an adult by then, came back from a trip to China, immigration officials tried to block him from re-entry to the country, arguing he actually wasn't really a citizen because his parents weren't and legally couldn't be a citizen. The Supreme Court sided with him It ruled that a child's citizenship doesn't depend on whether the parents can become citizens. Birth on the U.S. soil is what matters. Full stop. With only a few narrow historical exceptions, like children of foreign diplomats, that's been the operating rule in this country for 128 years. Now, let's go to modern times and what happened in the courts these last couple weeks, because this is where it gets current. On day one of his second term, President Trump, along with many others, signed an executive order trying to end birthright citizenship for children of parents who are in the country illegally or only temporarily. Every federal judge who looked at it blocked it almost immediately. One judge said flatly that no court in the country had ever endorsed that reading of the Constitution, and hers wasn't going to be the first. That set off two separate Supreme Court cases that people often mix up. So let me be really clear about the difference. The first case, Trump v. Casa, decided in the summer of 2025, about a year ago, was not about whether the order was constitutional. Now remember this order. It was about something narrow and more procedural. Whether a single federal judge can block a policy for the entire country, or only for the specific people who actually sued. The court ruled 6-3 that judges generally can't issue that kind of sweeping nationwide block anymore. That's it. That case said nothing about birthright citizenship itself. So to go further deeper into that, if I'm suing the government about some tariff issue from the Canadian border over, and I'm bringing this all the way up to the Supreme Court, and this judge can issue a nationwide injunction saying that if this is happening to others, it has to stop, whatever that means. So you can issue a nationwide injunction, which stems from one specific case and can be blanketed around the whole entire country, but it's not from the Supreme Court. That's where the argument gets made. It's just from a local federal judge. So that's really giving these local federal judges a lot of power. And that's why this case was important to say that, no, you can't have a blanket injunction on all of the United States, because every case is different, such and such. The second case, one that actually decided the real question, is Trump versus Barbara, which was decided last month in June of 2026. And the vote here is where it gets genuinely interesting. It's not really a clean number. 6 justices agreed the executive order couldn't stand, but only 5 of those 6 agreed on why. Chief Justice Roberts, along with Sotomayor, Kagan, and Barrett, and Jackson, ruled that the order was flat out unconstitutional, that the 14th Amendment itself guarantees birthright citizenship regardless of the parent's status. That's 5 votes. The 6th vote against the order came from Kavanaugh, but he explicitly said he did not think the Constitution required this outcome. He said Congress had, through federal statute, effectively adopted this rule over the decades, so the order violated the law, not the Constitution directly, which means on the actual constitutional question, is birthright citizenship, as currently applied, required by the Constitution, the real vote was 5-4, just a 1 vote difference. Justice Thomas Alito and Gorsuch dissented, arguing for a narrower reading tied to a person, or tied to where a person's parents are actually permanently domiciled, not just physically present. So here's where we land. Going in everything I'm about to say, this is a settled law right now by the narrowest possible margin. There's already a push in Congress for a constitutional amendment to try and change this through the front door instead, which requires 2/3 of Congress and I think either 2/3 or 70% of the states need to ratify it, which this day and age probably will never happen, not unless something radical comes through. But I think the way we apply birthright citizenship today has drifted pretty significantly from what it was built to handle. And I think there's a real serious argument to that, not a fringe one, for tying it more closely to a parent's legal status. And here's why. First, the world in 1868 is not the world in 2026. When the 14th Amendment was written, there was almost no such thing as illegal immigration. In the modern sense, the first major federal restriction on immigration didn't even exist yet. It came years later. There was no visa system, no green card, no legal category of undocumented. The farmers weren't grappling with the question of what happens when someone crosses a border in violation of a specific federal law, because that legal framework barely existed yet. They were solving a specific, urgent problem, making sure formerly enslaved Americans and their kids could never be denied citizenship again. Applying that same rule automatically with zero modification onto a completely different immigration reality nearly 160 years later isn't obviously honoring the amendment purpose. It might just be applying old language to a situation nobody in that room ever considered. You also notice that the immigration patterns have changed as well, from the type of individuals that are flooding across our borders from the past compared to more recently. Secondly, almost nobody else does it this way anymore. This actually surprises a lot of people. Unconditional birthright citizenship, where literally anyone born on your soil gets citizenship regardless of their parents' status, is actually the minority position among wealthy democracies today. Most of Europe requires at least one parent to be a citizen or a legal permanent resident. Countries like the UK, France, Germany, Australia, they've all moved to some kind of conditional system over the past few decades, usually requiring a parent to have legal status or a minimum period of residency. The US is now one of the few developed countries still running the fully unconditional version. That doesn't automatically make it wrong, but it does undercut the idea that changing it would somehow be some radical, unprecedented move. A lot of comparable democracies have already made that exact same adjustment. Third, the incentive problem is real and not just hypothetical. Justice Alito raised this directly in his dissent, and it's worth taking serious instead of dismissing it. When citizenship is automatically guaranteed to any child born here, regardless of how the parents got here or how long they intend to stay, you create a real incentive to enter or remain in the country specifically to secure that outcome for a child. You hear this called birth tourism in the immigration debate. Cases where people travel here, specifically sometimes as tourists, planning around the due date purely to secure citizenship for the baby with no other tie to the country at all. Whatever you think, the right policy response is pretending that incentive doesn't exist isn't intellectually honest. It's actually dangerous. Fourth, Justice Thomas's historical argument deserved more airtime than it has gotten. His dissent, by the way, which is the longest dissent he's written over the 3 decades on the court, argues that the actual language the framers were building on, not subject to any foreign power, from the 1866 Civil Rights Act, was clearly aimed at a specific population, people with no other national allegiance at all, like freed slaves, who, in Frederick Douglass's own words, had no other homeland. Thomas argues the amendment was a targeted fix for that specific historical wrong, not a blank check extending automatically to every... Sorry, the wind is actually crazy right now. Not a blank check extending automatically to every future immigration scenario, regardless of how temporary or unlawful someone's presence is. Even Gorsuch, who dissented alongside Thomas, wrote separately to flag that this whole framework runs into real definitional problems. But the core critique that we've stretched a narrow historical fix into an unconditional universal rule is a legitimate reading of the record, not just a political spin. Fifth, there's a fairness argument about enforcement. If the country has laws about who's allowed to enter and remain, and we treat every other consequence of violating immigration law seriously, deportation, fines, bars on reentry, is at least a coherent position to ask why the single most consequential outcome, automatic citizenship for a child, is treated as completely untouchable regardless of how someone got here. You don't have to think immigration enforcement should be harsh. To think there's some inconsistency in we enforce every part of immigration law except this one permanently, no matter what. Kavanaugh, a Trump appointee, still voted against the executive order on the grounds that Congress, not the president alone, has to be one to change this through actual legislation or a constitutional amendment, not an executive order signed on day one. Which I think that's actually the right process point. Separate from the policy question, if this is going to change, it should change through Congress and the amendment process so it never gets reversed. Not through a president signing an executive order on day one. That's a real distinction. And it's one reason some even justices, skeptical of unconditional birthright citizenship, still ruled against how the administration tried to do it. The settled precedent argument has limits, and it's worth naming them. Precedent gets revisited all the time when the underlying facts on the ground shift enough. That's not radical. That's how law is supposed to work. Wong Kim Ark resolved this specific fact pattern. A child of parents who were permanently legally settled in the country, running a business, raising a family, just legally barred from naturalizing themselves because of an immigration law. That's a meaningfully different fact pattern from someone who crossed the border a week before giving birth with no other connection to the country at all. Now, treating those two situations as legally identical just because they both involve a birth on U.S. soil might be extending a precedent past the actual facts it was built on rather than genuinely honoring it. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, you can also argue how would this even work? If citizenship depended on parents' legal status at the exact moment of birth, every American born person would, in theory, need to be able to prove their parents' immigration status from potential decades earlier in order to establish their own citizenship. Now, you'd have to say, are we going to have mass amnesty for people that are already here to grandfather them into this program? No, I don't think so. We need to deport everyone we can and then come up with some sort of a bill to get birthright citizenship passed. Passed to revoke birthright citizenship. And then, yes, it's not hard actually to establish your citizenship. And if it is, probably because you're illegal or have shaky history. Now, in the case of Wong Kim Ark, where his family has been settled here for years and building a family and contributing to society, that is, like I said just before, that is completely different than what we're dealing with today. And that should have real debate, and that should have real ramifications on this argument moving forward, because yeah, maybe you're illegal, but you actually are running a business and actually really are contributing to society and to our country with unwavering allegiance, then yeah, you should get grandfathered in. But that's really not what we're seeing on the ground. We're seeing a lot of stress on the systems. But so here's where things stand right now, right? Heading into the fall, birthright citizenship, as it has always worked, is still the law of the land. And, that's not up to debate for today. But it's survived by a single vote on the actual constitutional question. And there's already a real push in Congress. Senator Rand Paul and Senator Eric Schmidt have both introduced proposed constitutional amendments to try to change it the right way through the amendment process rather than through executive action. Realistically, that amendment process requires 2/3 of both chambers of Congress and 3/4 of the United States, which is an extremely high bar, like I mentioned, which is the highest bar in American law. So don't expect this to change fast, if it changes at all. Now, this is where it leaves us in if it changes at all. Why don't I have? I think it was. Oh, okay, just wait. Revoking birthright citizenship would theoretically require, yes, an act of Congress to rechange the law, because if for somehow an executive order does get passed through, that can always be revoked, and that's just really a messy situation. But when we're talking about it getting revoked by the Supreme Court, it's really funny because Trump appointed 3 justices in his first term: Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett. And what's really ironic is Trump gets these justices on for the Republicans, right? Even though they're judges, but that's just the day politics are, because you'll never see Democratic judges go against Democrats and their policies. Very rare occasions. They stick to one. They're really organized, which isn't good, but they'll never go back on their own. But we'll see this with the Republicans is, we have this moral high ground where we keep ourselves, with a higher moral standard, to where, okay, yeah, we might judge the facts based on our circumstances, as instead of going by like this group think and sticking on party lines. Because you look at Amy Coney Barrett and you look at, if you ever wanted to do some research into her family. And then, oh yeah, it kind of makes sense why no, she's not going to revoke birthright citizenship and help save our country. And really what it comes down to is also this precedent argument. We hear this a lot in legal cases, is what is the precedent? What is the precedent before that? Judge on the precedent. But there really is no precedent on what's happening right now. Our country is being invaded by parasites that are, sucking the blood out of our economy, sucking the blood out of average Americans, is just being a full drain on society. And the illegal immigration is a whole different, kind of the same, but also different than birthright citizenship, but they're intertwined, right? You can see how both of them become intertwined. It's just yet another thing that, President Trump promised to do, and it's never going to get done in his term. I don't think it's going to get done for another, definitely not next election cycle or next, 2028 or anything like that, if the Republicans even win that, because Trump used his card this one time, and it was his own judges that shut it down. And we just see from this Trump administration again and again, a lot of talk and not a lot of action, right? I just saw this like last week, another shooting. Maybe it was up in Maine, I think, ice shooting. And, Susie Collins is saying, we got to tame down the ice because she wants to get reelected, especially now that Graham Plattner's out of there. She wants to get reelected back to Congress. And so, DHS comes out with we're going to stop and stop all car. It wouldn't be like car raids, but car raids and stop pulling over cars, because this is kind of how this man was shot up in Maine, and it's like, okay, we stopped going into cities. Now we're stopping car raids. Now we're stopping, going into people's homes and workplaces. It's like, okay, so what's the point of giving all of our money to DHS for these ICE officers if they're not going to do anything? Okay, we have both chambers in Congress. We have the presidency, kind of have the court, depending on the issue. We just see this constantly again, war in Iran, and just really not getting anything done. But guess what? They did get done. They did get they're passing this bill for, making daylight savings time permanent. And of course they couldn't get that right, because hearing reports are, they're switching it to like keeping it on the wrong time. That's allegedly worse for your health or something. I'm not a health guru, but it's like, when can we actually get some substance out of them and really get down to brass tacks? Because this birthright citizenship will not ever be revoked under Trump. It won't go under his legacy. Not much will, because his presidency is effectively over. He is a lame duck in the political world. So he's got a couple more months here before probably Democrats control one or both chambers in Congress, unfortunately. But I think it kind of has to happen, because nothing is going to change from the Republicans until saying we're going to get a radical movement is maybe not the right words, because that's probably not true. We're never going to get a radical Republican in there, but just an actual Republican that can get down to business and not take any crap and put America first is really what we need in there. And I'm not seeing that from this administration, like, at all. And I'm not going to see that from Marco Rubio and JD Vance. So maybe we can go into a little dive into those two sometime before 2028 for sure. I will, because those guys aren't the guys. They might be interim. We thought Trump was the guy, but he really wasn't that guy. He was just there. Good president, like him, way better than the alternatives, but he wasn't that Alexander the Great figure that this country needs. But we'll see that from the left. The DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, they're getting their foothold in stronger and stronger, winning their elections. And no, I don't think communism and that stuff is going, socialism going to take over America. No, but it's the environment we're in and we're building, and they are gaining more steam, and it is kind of scary. And you have to look in the mirror and say, well, how is this coming? Where is this coming from? Because when Trump does his speeches, he's saying, America's never been richer. The economy is doing good. Everyone's getting money. And it's like, okay, well, then you take an average American, you're like, okay, gas is up. All this stuff is up. Grocery bills. Okay, I'm not getting richer, right? Like, let's put it me, or I can feel it in my pocketbook or checkbook. And then Trump comes out and saying everyone's richer. It's like, there's going to be a disconnect there between your average American and what Trump says, that I don't think they realize that disconnect is pushing people away from Trump and the Republican Party. Like, it just is. And that's kind of really common sense to me. Maybe not. But kind of got away from the birthright citizenship. But it all ties in, the disconnect and the not really getting anything done, in my opinion. But let me know what you think. If you watch this last little rant and art, comment, email me. You can DM me on X and Facebook now. Go check out the pages, share, like, comment what you think. I love feedback. This is really why I'm doing it, just get feedback and just, iron sharpens iron. So I love on discourse, thinking through, geopolitics, thoroughly listening, gives me I'm not gonna say that. Yeah, but I enjoy that stuff. So, um, but until then, stay curious.